Hey everyone, I think it's time we talk some turkey about the end of Scientology and what it is that us critics are actually trying to accomplish. If you're interested in that, stay tuned. I've been teasing my next installment in the Basics of Scientology series for a couple weeks now, and I apologize for not having it done yet, but I ran doing some research just yesterday and ran into a whole new area that opened up something that caused me to have to push that forward another week. So I figured this week I would talk about something I've been seeing talked about off and on, and a lot of questions asked in social media, in the Facebook groups, about the goals of us as critics and the end of Scientology. What is it we're trying to accomplish and how are we going to get there? And having done this for a few years now, I've come to learn a great many things, and I've found that when you first take on Scientology, you feel like, we're going to do this thing, right? And you got a lot of angst, especially as a former member. You got all kinds of built up about it, and so that comes out, and you start working, and you start putting a lot of energy into this, and you kind of, and then after a while, as you go, you start learning more and more about how the real world works, and how corporations work, and how finances work, and how taxes work, and all this stuff, right? That as a second-generation Scientologist, and definitely as a Sea Org member, I was not in the loop on. Which is not to say that everything that I've come before on this channel is wrong or false or shouldn't be, that I regret having said any of that, because I don't, or anything like that. That's not my point at all. My point is that you learn that you have to temper your expectations with reality. And there's an awful lot of people in this world, and they're doing an awful lot of things, and Scientology is a very small, small part of the big picture. It is something that we can learn from. It is something that we can get a lot of lessons out of, so as not to repeat those same kind of mistakes either with Scientology or other destructive cults or high control groups. I feel that as my channel has progressed, I have gone into some of those other areas and taken you guys along for the ride, and I think that we've learned quite a bit, and there's still a ton of things to learn and know to proof ourselves up against falling for con jobs, undue influence, that sort of thing, propaganda. But in terms of the Scientology critic world, my generation, or my iteration of Scientology criticism, is really about the fourth or fifth, or maybe even more, iteration of Scientology critics, going all the way back to the 1950s, when people were first calling out L. Ron Hubbard for his pseudoscience in Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, and then, some of the odd things that were going on with the Church of Scientology. I don't think real organized criticism started taking place until the 1960s and 70s, when Scientology had become more consolidated itself and become more of a corporate enterprise. 1950s were a pretty disorganized time for Scientology, and it was very formative stages. And I think that as it became clear that there was something really nefarious going on, they lost their tax exemption in 1967. And other groups started, the FDA raid in 1963 and various other things that they were being, very, very heavily looked into by the government during that stage. But they kind of beat the government in a number of ways through the 1960s and 70s, and of course finally in 93 getting their tax exemption back. So, people ask, just to bring this point up, that people are always asking, why doesn't the FBI do something? Why doesn't the government do something? Why doesn't the IRS do something? Well, if you really want a hard, solid, factual answer to that, they did. And they took their best shot. And they dented Scientology, but they did not destroy it. And it continues and it persists because of the rights that are afforded them under the First Amendment and the tax exemption and all of that we're all very familiar with if you've been paying attention to Scientology for any length of time. So, one of the things that happens, I think, for people, who follow my channel or look into this, watch Leah's show, and you get, or you've seen Going Clear, and you look at the, the human and the civil rights abuses that go on in Scientology, and you just go, my God, something has to be done about this. Well, there can be some fatigue that sets in over time as you battle this group, because we're talking about, a big organized activity. The Church of Scientology is not in its formative stages anymore, and it is solidified itself into quite a powerful group, and a very litigious group too, or at least it has the potential to be quite litigious still. So taking on Scientology legally is, I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, a little bit of a fool's errand, because of the sheer volume of money and resources they have available to them. And my hat is always off to people who go after them legally. I admire people who do that, because it's a truly heroic action, but it is also a truly expensive action. And I think that point might also be missed by some people who go, well, why don't you sue them, or why don't former members, do a class action or something? Well, when you get into the details of what that sort of thing would take, it's quite an adventure doing something like that. And it requires money and time and lawyers who are willing to do the job. And a lot of things go into that. It's not like anything like you see on TV and TV shows at all. That's what you see on TV as far as how the legal world works, or how law enforcement works, or really pretty much how almost anything works. TV is just a fantasy. So, in real life, things are a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive. All right. Now, none of this means the whole tone of this entire video is not defeatism, all right? I'm just trying to talk turkey here about the realities of what it takes to take on a group like the Church of Scientology. And I think that some of that critic fatigue is also another reason why some people will see clashes between critics in the ex-Scientology world, right? On some of the social forums, there have been some blow-ups and some personality clashes. Tori and I did a video a few weeks ago about the fact that the Office of Special Affairs has a very big vested interest in creating or inciting or manipulating or assisting and egging on those kinds of clashes. And nothing that Tori and I said was wrong. We were absolutely spot on about that, and I still very much believe that OSA is behind a great many of the clashes and fights that go on. But I hope that I didn't get the idea across that every single disagreement or argument or problem that critics have in the ex-Scientology world is solely and only due to the Office of Special Affairs, because that's just not true. And I have myself been attacked by other critics or ex-Scientologists for saying that OSA is behind a lot of the clashes that go on, which I find humorous, because I'm attacked on the idea that, well, Chris Shelton just thinks it's all OSA. Well, no, that's not really what I meant to get across. And if I did put it that way, then I was in error, because of course not everybody is going to get along. And we have, when you're when you come out of a group like Scientology, we didn't all get in for the same reasons. We all didn't come out for the same reasons, and we're not all battling Scientology for the same reasons. And we're not, the goal of what we're trying to accomplish is not always the same. Even though we're all on the same page that Scientology is a bad thing and that it should be not here anymore, our expectations and goals and what we're trying to accomplish are sometimes quite different. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of make that clear, that some of these clashes that you see, I think, are due to personalities or different opinions and ideas about things, different interpretations of Hubbard's words, for example. And people can have whatever opinions they want. And I'm always sad when those clashing opinions lead to personality clashes, which lead to unfriending and blocking and problems. And I really hate that. I just don't think that any of that is really necessary. I think people can have different interpretations of different passages in Hubbard's texts, for example, and it shouldn't lead to all-out war. And it makes me sad when it does. Because those kinds of things are minutia. They really don't matter in the big, wide picture of Scientology as a destructive cult. You know, how I interpret one line or a couple passages, or, you know, whether I think Hubbard was this or that. You know, yeah, okay, good. It makes an interesting case. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It's kind of up for debate or opinion, and maybe we could have that debate, and maybe that would be interesting. But I think it would be nice if we could all stay on the same page somehow. However, that's just my optimism, and I know that that's not always possible. All right, that all being said, let's talk about Scientology now. This group is a very well-funded, well-organized group. They are small, but they know they're small, and they are into the martyrdom of it, and they're into the taking on the world part of that, right? The people who work in the Office of Special Affairs are fanatics. They're really into their work. A lot of Scientologists who assist OSA in their work are quite fanatical when it comes to their mindset. And they've really bought into Hubbard's words and ideas, and they really think that they, like Neo in the Matrix, that they are taking on the big, wide powers that be, and they're the underdogs, and they're going to win because they have, you know, might and right and all of that on their side. And that's the position that the Scientologists have. So they fight, you know, tooth and claw for their cause. And they have a lot of money behind them with which to engage in that fight. And they have a whole army of private investigators and lawyers who don't really have much of a moral compass, and who are just, you know, doing their job, just following orders. And so they assist Scientology in their efforts. That kind of thing isn't really going to end anytime soon. Scientology has enough funding to keep itself going for many, many years. And we should really face the reality that it could even be decades. Its membership can, even if they don't get any new members in, right? And there are a lot of different reasons for this. I have spoken on this channel, on my podcast and in videos with Aaron Smith-Levin, with Jeffrey Augustine, and, you know, hopefully in the future maybe I can speak to some others about this, but about the economics of, you know, of Scientology and the tax exemption and the finances and this sort of thing. And even though their Scientology organizationally right now is facing very big problems in Russia, some, you know, fairly medium-sized problems in other European countries, they're not really facing any real problems here in the United States or in the UK. And according to what I am, you know, finding out, they are huge in Taiwan for some reason. Taiwan just loves Scientology, and they've got a very thriving 200-man organization there, and they're doing brisk business out there in Taiwan. And one possible reason for that, by the way, is because a lot of my videos, Leah's show, Tony's blog, a lot of the critics' work that is done to educate people about Scientology doesn't ever get translated into Taiwanese. And so they don't have it on their internet. And I don't know, you know, how many Taiwanese people speak English, but this is apparently a thing over there, that they just don't know what we know about Scientology. So that's a problem that somebody needs to solve. I'm not going to learn Taiwanese to solve it, but that is an issue. All right, so even, you know, even though they have those problems around the world, Scientology has plenty of money for plenty of lawyers to be able to deal with those problems. And if they do get kicked out of Russia, that would be interesting. But it's not going to result in Scientology's downfall in the UK or in Europe or in the United States. In fact, it will really only serve to help Scientology in the long run, because they will play the martyr card and the oppressed card, right? Religious oppression that's occurring in Russia. And that's why I made a video long ago saying that trying to ban Scientology in a country is absolutely, positively the wrong move. Because they will garner public sympathy and support merely on the basis that they have been banned from a country. Even if you don't agree with Scientology's beliefs and ideas, you'll still get, you know, give sympathy in that direction because you believe in freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of religion. So that's not particularly a winning strategy. And I know that this is a very controversial statement, and there are people out there who think that I'm full of it right now for saying this, but that's just how I see it. All right. So The other factor, the other thing to include in here is this ideal org strategy that's going on right now. This has been going on since like 2003 or so, where Miscavige has ordered that all the churches buy great big new buildings in order to be a true reflection of Scientology and the quality of Scientology. And he didn't want to see folding tables and folding chairs and crickety carpets with holes in it and carpet and coffee stains and all this kind of thing. That were what churches of Scientology looked like for the most part. They looked like run-down, beat-up places that were not doing so great financially because they weren't. Because all the money goes straight up the line. It doesn't get distributed back down to these churches to make themselves posh and nice and inviting. Despite all that, they were still bringing new people in, and they were still doing some business. Well, the ideal org strategy was the idea to raise all of these orgs up in terms of the quality of their presentation with uniformed staff, great big buildings, renovated at great expense. But there were some other factors involved in this behind the scenes that I don't know everybody is particularly up to speed on. One of those is that one of the big problems that we had when I was a manager for the Western United States is that the churches, before they went ideal, before this whole thing existed, were renting or leasing their quarters, and they would fall behind on their rent all the time. And this was a huge problem for us in management because the policy was orgs don't close. They can't fail and go into unexistence and we're just going to let them close their doors. Absolutely not. No way could that be allowed to occur. So we would have, from a continental management level, would have to pony up the money from our reserves to pay their rent or their backlogged lease payments and keep them in those quarters and then kick their asses to make some money and get the thing going so that they could keep the doors open and pay their bills. This was an ongoing, continuous problem for us with many of the smaller, failing churches around the Western United States, namely Hawaii, Albuquerque, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City. I mean, these tiny podunk little places. When I first got into the Sea Org back in '95, the very first project I was ever sent out on was to Kansas City to make money so that they would not be kicked out of their building. Right? We had to, as Sea Org members, we had to go in there and drive around and sell people Scientology. Reg them is the Scientology term. We had to reg a lot of people in the Kansas City area to keep those doors open because the staff in Kansas City wasn't getting the job done. So that was just a continuing problem and story for us. When the ideal org strategy was announced and they started, doing fundraising to buy buildings, that was a huge weight off management's shoulders because now when they buy the building, they don't have to pay rent on it anymore or a lease payment to a non-Scientology landlord. And then there is no rent. The orgs, in the ideal orgs, as far as I know, they don't pay rent payments to the Church of Scientology International. All they have to do, once they've got their building, they've fundraised the millions of dollars to buy it and renovate it, all they got to do at that point is keep the doors open, pay the utilities. That's it. They don't have to do anything else to keep that building. There's no property taxes, there's no income taxes through the tax exemption. So the operating costs of these big buildings are actually kind of low, and they don't have to pay their staff. So, payroll is kind of a breeze, right? It's nice when they get it, and they've played around with the percentages that the staff get in order to try to give them, a little bit more money here and there. But that goes in and out and up and down. And if the org is not making any money, then then it doesn't matter. 50% of zero is still zero, right? So if they're not making any money, then they're not going to be able to pay their staff. But they only need to make a few $1,000s a week in order to pay the heating bill or or the air conditioner and the electricity and maybe, the toilet paper and that sort of thing and keep the place going. So that was kind of, that was a big problem that has been being solved with this ideal org program. This also, though, removes the necessity of the staff to make money to keep the rent payments paid and that sort of thing. And so the staff, are from what I'm hearing these days, the staff are pretty demoralized in a lot of these ideal orgs because it's a double-edged sword, right? Like now they don't have to pay rent or leases or anything like that, and they only have to keep the operations costs going. But the promise of the ideal org strategy was if you build it, they will come. So they thought all these staff and the public who paid over all these millions of dollars over the last 10, 15 years for these buildings were promised the sun, the moon, and the stars with these ideal orgs. And yet what happens is they open them with great fanfare and then nobody comes in. Nobody's walking in the door. They're not booming. They're not, packed course rooms and packed auditing rooms. No, that's a fantasy. And so the staff and the public are now seeing that that's the reality, and they are demoralized and they are leaving as a result. And so it's, so it's shrinking. So it was a good, and as far as operations costs go, it was a good move. As far as the staff morale goes, and as far as the public morale goes, not so much. So that, so eventually these outer orgs, these city level churches, the Denver and Milano and Twin Cities and these places, I don't know that they're ever going to shutter their doors, but they're less and less effective as intake or vacuum cleaners for new Scientology members to be gotten into the fold, and eventually do services at the city level church and then move on up to the Sea Org, the advanced services that are offered at the Sea Org delivery orgs. Okay. That's becoming less and less of an effective thing because Scientology is failing in those places. But my point is that in terms of a long-term look, if you're thinking that these orgs are going to start closing, they're not going to start closing because it only takes 3 or 4 people in order to keep an org going at a minimum. So if it got to the point where a Church of Scientology, let's say here in Denver, where all the staff just was like, okay, we all give up and we're all just leaving staff and we're done, the Sea Org would only have to send in a team of about 3, 4, 5 people, and they are very motivated as Sea Org members, and they would keep the place open. And that's only a few Sea Org members out of 4,000 or 5,000 that exist on the planet, and they could keep all of these organizations open with a very, very skeleton crew number of people, and that will keep the doors open. Those Sea Org members would manage to sell some books and keep enough people coming in that they would, keep the lights on and they'd keep the place going. And even if the Church of Scientology International, even if it came to the point where they had to subsidize these city-level churches by sending money down to them to keep their doors open and the lights on, they would do that. And Scientology has plenty in reserves to keep every single organization in the world going on a skeleton crew just to keep the lights on for years and years and years. Because they don't have any lease payments, they don't have any rent payments, they don't have any property tax, right? And those tend to be the big ticket items that these churches were failing over. So that's kind of a more truthful look at what goes on, financially with these orgs to keep them open. All right. So coming back, so now that I've made all those points, okay, I'm just kind of looking over at some notes I made here. What is it that we're trying to do? Well, I can't really speak for everybody else in terms of the critic community because obviously we're not all on the same page in regards to our goals and our purposes, like I said earlier. So I will now speak for me personally, and maybe this is representative of other critics in the ex-Scientology community as well. What are we trying to do? Well, we're not trying to get the doors of every Church of Scientology shuttered and locked forever and trying to, free all the Sea Org members and shut everything down, because that is a wholly and completely unreal expectation. And I don't see that happening in my lifetime. Even unless something radical were to happen when David Miscavige ends up leaving, and that is a total coin toss as to what's going to occur. Unless something radical happened where, the feds moved in or something, or started seizing assets of the church or something. Like if real criminal charges were brought against the church, then the game changes. But I don't particularly see any indications of that actually happening. I just don't. Okay? So instead of an unreal expectation, I thought we should talk about some very real expectations that we can all have and that we can all contribute to. So what we want to do is we want to cut off the flow of new members into Scientology, and we want to try as best we can to try to reach those people who are still in, who can be reached, and we want to try to get them out. And by doing both of those things, we're actually saving people's lives. That is not an exaggeration, it's not hyperbole. If you keep somebody out of Scientology, you are potentially saving their life, because Scientology does things to people that could kill them. Namely, the purification rundown, the indoctrination, creating a fanatical, even, extremist, radicalized mindset in some of these people. I mean, there's no good that comes of being involved with Scientology in the long run. It is very, very desirable to not have anything to do with Scientology and to stay the hell away from it, and to get other people to not become part of it. And anything that it contributes to that is a good move, okay? But to be totally realistic, there are a certain percentage of people, and I don't pretend to know what the percentage is, but it is it's lowish. I'd say it's in single digits in terms of population. But there is always a certain percentage of people who are literally going to believe anything you tell them. And because of their biases and their personal hopes and desires and their mental blinders and lack of critical thinking, they will fall for anything. If Peter Popoff can still be selling miracle water online and through commercials and people buy it, then people are going to always continue to buy into Scientology. There's always going to be a percentage of people who are going to fall for that. And it's sad. It really shouldn't be that way. We would like to think that you could reach everybody, but I've come to learn over the last few years that even that the best possible critical thinking and attempts to reach people are not you're not always going to succeed across the boards. They're just not, right? I mean, let's face it, there are people who believe that the earth is flat. There are other people who believe the earth is hollow. I mean, there are people who believe all kinds of crazy, crazy things, and they're not all just a bunch of stupid idiots. They just have a proclivity to believe crazy things. And Scientology will always have that market. But it's a pretty small market. And I think that at this point, a lot of the people who are still involved in the church fall into that percentage of people. It's either that, or it's, the other people who are still in Scientology are the people who are family and friends of those people who don't want to get disconnected from them for whatever reason, because they're family or they're good friends or they're business associates or whatever. So I think that's really what we're dealing with when we talk about the existing base of Scientologists. So that's kind of always going to be there. So we can't ever pretend that we're going to reach everyone, but we can do our level best to reach as many as we can. What we want to do, I've kind of wrote out 3 goals that I have or expectations I'm trying to work toward as a Scientology critic. 1, I want to ease the human and civil rights abuses through exposure, because Scientology does respond to a degree to public pressure. If Scientology corporate, I'll put it, right, Church Scientology International, feels threatened by exposure, then they will change their evil ways when it comes to human and civil rights abuses. We've already talked about this. We've already seen changes happening within Scientology as a result of that. Some of those changes are a little hard to believe. Some of them are not confirmed yet, totally. Like, did they really cancel the RPF, or did they just put it under another name? And there's lots of opinions about that, and we don't know for a fact yet that has occurred, but we have pretty good intel from the inside that is the case, and I believe that is the case. But Scientology's, the Sea Org is always going to have some disciplinary measure to take care of its recalcitrants, and so maybe there's not an RPF anymore, but maybe there's something else that approximates that. I don't know, and as we carry on here, we'll get more and more information from inside the church to see. But the abortion issue, for example, coerced abortions, I mean, that is definitely not a thing like it used to be. Children, very young children are not allowed in the Sea Org anymore, as far as we can tell, or it's a rare exception now, whereas it used to be commonplace and just accepted in the 1970s and 80s. Kids were just running rampant all over the place, and to disastrous and tragic results, and that's been exposed. And as a result of that, we have seen that Scientology has changed. It's not perfect. I'm not at all singing the praises of Scientology. I am merely saying that they respond to external threats and pressure if they feel that exposure is going to somehow threaten their tax exemption, or is somehow going to get Scientologists or Sea Org members thrown into jail. Right? They will change their ways if they think that that's what's happening, and we've seen some of that. The other thing, educate the public to avoid Scientology like the plague that it is. And in my case, specifically with this channel, I want to leave a permanent record of what it is, how it works, and why it's total nonsense. And that has been, my view of that, of the purpose of this channel has evolved over time. When I first came on the air and was first making videos, I was not about taking down Scientology's belief system. But now I am doing that because I see, as I learn more and more about it, that was a necessary step in order to reach everybody out there who still believes that Scientology has some validity or some value. It doesn't, and it really shouldn't be practiced, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to personally, one-on-one, deride and degrade people who are independent Scientologists and call them all a bunch of idiots or something, because that's not what I think, and I don't think that's the right way to go about dealing with that. I think education is a good way to go about dealing with that. And so I am doing this Basics of Scientology series in order to take on all of the philosophical tenets of Scientology and show how they are nonsense and don't have scientific value or validity. So that permanent record, putting that out there so that it will always be there for people to access, I think that's a very important goal and something I'm doing with this channel. And finally, and probably most important of all, help people recover from Scientology or other cult experiences through education, support, and merely a commonality of experience. I was not a Mormon, I was not a Jehovah's Witness, I was not a Mooney, I was not a Gothard follower. And yet I have talked with former members of all of those groups on this channel. I have worked to educate people about not just Scientology, but all of these kinds of groups that engage in undue influence and indoctrination. And I think that through that, when people come here, I have been told over and over again in the comments section and in private emails and messages that people came to this channel to, find out about Scientology, but stayed because they found that the information I was giving was actually directly relatable to them and their own experiences with their own cultish activities or groups. So I think that is also a long-term goal of this channel and what I have to offer to the world at large with it. So, all that being said, the takeaway from all of this is that Scientology as an organization is not particularly going anywhere. But that's not to say that what we do as critics of Scientology or as activists against it doesn't mean anything or isn't helpful, because it is. And people ask what they can do all the time, and we say, okay, well, demand action from your representatives. Demand action from the IRS, get their tax exemption taken away. Report any instances you see of criminal activity or unlawful activity or immoral activity to the legal authorities. I mean, these are things that matter, and it does help to do those things. But you know what else helps? Being kind. Being a person that people can come to for answers to things. It just in your immediate vicinity, just with your family and your friends and your associates. You know, if you are a point of refuge and support for people who are having issues or troubles with their life, that is so rare these days. It is truly a gift to find a person who is that way, who can just sit and listen and understand and support and help, right? It might not seem like it's a lot, but in this day and age and in this world, it is everything. You know, taking part in civil rights groups or activist groups that work for the good of everybody, that helps. That matters. Not only does it help you personally with with a good morale boost and a feeling that you're doing something effective out in the world, but it does reach other people. And you know, the other day there was this meme that I saw where it said that, you know, in every time travel story that's ever been told, there's the butterfly effect where you go into the future and some tiny little incremental change that doesn't mean anything could end up, you know, or people go in the past, and do this, some incremental tiny little change, and they come back to the present and everything is different, right? But sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better. But, you know, these little tiny, eensy-weensy, insignificant changes like killing a butterfly, you know, going back in time, killing a butterfly 100 years ago and then coming forward and finding out the world isn't here anymore, right? Well, that's a meme, that's an idea, but here's another corollary to that, which is in the present, maybe that little tiny action that you take that you don't think means a whole lot is going to have consequences and repercussions into the future that are going to make incredible waves and are going to change things for the better. Right? If you do good things now, in the here and now, you know, whether you're rewarded in the future or not, it can have big ripple effects out into the world at large. So it's always to our advantage to help people, to support people, to listen to people, to tolerate differences and try to get along rather than, you know, I'm gonna battle you. You know, that does not have long-term good consequences, generally speaking. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. I'm not much of a motivational speaker, but I thought that needed to be said. Individual acts of kindness over the last 4 years of my life have made tremendous differences to me personally and have enabled me to do what I do to now reach all of you guys and offer you the information and education and entertainment that this channel offers. So, you know, pay it forward, and I think that is a lot. So with that, thank you for listening.